The experience was, all of a sudden, everything in the world made sense to me.
Hello and welcome to On Books. This is Chris here, recording from the beautiful East Village of New York City. That up front was Phil Libin, and that's where we left off last episode. You can jump in any On Books episode. You don't need to have listened to the last episode for this to make sense. But where we left off was that quote from Phil Libin. He's the CEO of Evernote. I use Evernote every single day. Every day. It's awesome. We could talk about how to use it. If you need any tips, I could put out a video. Actually, I'm going to put out a video for that on my YouTube channel pretty soon. It just saves me so much time. And yeah, it's really amazing. But let's get down to it. So this week, I'm excited because everything is piecing together. Everything's piecing together. I started off with this kind of question a few episodes ago, and I had read this quote. And the quote was, if you remember, I wake up in the morning torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. And this makes it hard to plan the day. This is an E.B. White quote. So that's the dilemma. That's the situation here on the ground, me waking up and wondering, am I doing enough good? Are the things that I believe that I am doing that are good for the world, however big or small they may be, are they really making a difference? Or are they this salad dressing that I kind of sprinkle around my life to make things just kind of look and taste and appear more aesthetically pleasing to me or outward to other people? I was just kind of getting really into the questions and wanted to examine that. And so on that note, by kind of sharing that with some friends recommended books to me, and I kind of got on this path of which I am now bringing you. So we started with this essay that I wrote called On Leaving the World Better Than How I Found It. And that kind of leapfrogged me into a few different books and discussions with friends, bringing you now The Clock of the Long Now on long-term thinking. And after this, we'll be looking at The Most Good You Can Do, a book by Peter Singer, and another book by him called The Life You Can Save. So we're in this series now, and I'm super excited. I'm also, big surprise, going to have some interviews with these authors. I reached out to Peter Singer, and he's down. He's down to be on the show. So it's going to be exciting to have this conversation with him, bringing him some of the existential dilemmas that are going through my head about doing the most good I can do, as well as Alexander Rose, who is responsible for building the 10,000-year clock, as well as the Long Now Foundation, to which this book is based on. So we're in the thick of it. This is going to be a great series. I'm super excited. Today's episode, we are going deep into the order of civilizations. This is the chapter 7 that I highlighted up at the front of the episode by Phil Libin. And yes, this chapter kind of blew my mind, kind of took some levels of frustration and just massaged them and gave me a little bit of relaxation in thinking about how time moves, how change happens, and how we are a part of it and how we are not a part of it. So I'm going to get into it right now. I'm going to give a little highlights up front, and then going to read a little bit from it and recap with some of my thoughts at the end. So get ready. I hope you're excited. This is The Order of Civilization. Okay, so Chapter 7, The Order of Civilization. One of the big takeaways for me in this chapter, one of the things that got me really excited, is this idea of the 6 distinct time scales. So I'm going to go more into it when I start reading, but just to set you up to listen for that, the idea of the 6 distinct time scales, it's this way that culture and nature move slower than other timescales such as fashion. And there's a whole map and drawing here, which I'm going to include on the site. And this whole chapter is about 5 pages long. So not that long. You could definitely go pick this up and read this after if you wanted to go into it. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview now by reading it to you. So let's get started. Here we go. From the top. In civilizations with long nows, says Brian Eno, you feel a very strong but flexible structure, built to absorb shocks and in fact incorporate them. One can imagine how such a process evolves. All civilizations suffer shocks, yet only those that absorb the shocks survive. Okay, so the thing here to note is this back and forth paradox of being strong but flexible, and the civilization that can absorb shocks. So over time, being able to take the shocks of time and absorb them and potentially even like incorporate them into the growth of that civilization. So that's kind of the setup there. So that's the setup. Yet this still does not explain the mechanism of how it works, however. So here we go. In the recent years, a few scientists have been probing a similar issue in ecological terms. The question is, how do they manage change? And how do they absorb and incorporate shocks? So looking at ecology, how does a different ecological system absorb and manage change? Well, the question appears to lie in the relationship between components in a system that have different change rates and different scales of size. Instead of breaking under stress like something brittle, these systems yield as if they were malleable. Some parts respond quickly to the shock, allowing slower parts to ignore the shock and maintain their steady duties of system continuity. The combination of fast and slow components makes the system resilient, along with the way the differently paced parts affect each other. Fast learns, slow remembers. So I underline that part there because I think it's really cool to think about the fast and the slow components of a system that will make it resilient and will make it, flexible yet sturdy. This whole thing just keeps coming up. So fast proposes, slow disposes. Fast is discontinuous, slow is continuous. Fast and small instructs slow and big by accrued innovation and occasional revolution. Slow and big controls small and fast by constraint and constancy. I had to look that up. It was like constancy? Never heard that word before, but it just means being constant. Fast gets all our attention. Slow has all the power. All durable dynamic systems have this sort of structure. It's what makes them adapt and robust. Okay, so now consider, for example, a coniferous forest. Another word I had to look up, coniferous. It just means the kind of forest that has pine needles and I think cones, like a pine tree or something like that. So anyway, I'm learning a lot here, and I'm hopefully sharing it with you. The hierarchy in scale of pine needles. Tree crowns, patch, stand, let me start this over again for you. The hierarchy in scale of pine needles, tree crown, patch, stand, whole forest, and biome is also a time hierarchy. Whoa. The needle changes within a year. The tree crown over several years. The patch over many decades. The stand, which I think he means like the trunk of the tree, the stand over a couple of centuries, and the forest over thousands of years, and the biome over 10,000 years. The range of what the needle may do is constrained by the tree crown, which is constrained by the patch and stand, which are controlled by the forest, which is controlled by the biome. So he's basically saying all of these things are, concentric circles out linked to each other and thus controlled by the larger scale of time. Nevertheless, innovation percolates. Good use of percolate. Innovation percolates, reminds me of coffee, throughout the system via evolutionary competition among lineage of individual trees dealing with the stresses of crowding, parasites, predation, and weather. Occasionally, large shocks such as fire or disease or human predation can suddenly upset the whole system, sometimes all the way to the biome level. Fire, explosions, all the things we see in life. Well, the mathematician and physicist Freeman Dyson makes a related observation about human society. And this part I rather like. It pulls it all together. Ready for this? Here we go. The destiny of our species is shaped by the imperatives of the survival on the 6 distinct timescales. Underline that. To survive means to compete successfully on all 6 timescales. But the unit of survival is different at each of the 6 timescales. So on a timescale of years, the unit is the individual, like you. On a timescale of decades, the unit is the family, your family. On a timescale of centuries, the unit is the tribe or nation. On a timescale of millennia, the unit is culture. On a timescale of tens of millennia, the unit is the species. On a timescale of eons, the unit is the whole web of life on our planet. Every human being is the product of adaptation to the demands of all 6 timescales. That is why conflicting loyalties are deep in our nature. In order to survive, we have needed to be loyal to ourselves, to our families, to our tribes, to our cultures, to our species, and to the planet, all at the same time, seemingly. Well, if our psychological impulses are complicated, it is because they are shaped by the complicated and conflicting demands. End quote. All right, so in terms of quantity, there are a great many pine needles and great many humans, great many forests, nations, and only a few biomes, only a few cultures. There's only one planet that I know of. The hierarchy here also underlines much of the causation and explanation. So on any subject, ask a 4-year-old's annoying question of why. You could do that, right? Like why? So if you ask it 5 times, you actually get some deep structure. So here you go. So like, why are you married, mommy? Oh, that's how you make a family. Why make a family? It's the only way people have found to civilize children. Civilized children? Why civilized children? Well, if we didn't, the world would be nothing but nasty gangs. Why? Because gangs can't make farms and cities and universities. Why? Because they don't care about anything larger than themselves. Stewart Brand writes, considered operationally rather in terms of loyalty, I propose 6 significant levels of pace and size in the working structure of a robust and adaptable civilization. From fast to slow, the levels are, and there are 6 of them. So from top to bottom, the fastest being fashion and art moves the fastest. Then commerce, infrastructure, governance, culture, and finally the slowest being nature. I'm going to repeat this once or twice more because I realize you are listening to this, probably doing a few other things potentially at the same time, and it's important. And there's a little chart here as well. So you may want to look down at your hand. If you put your left and right hand down, you can see your left all the way on the left, that little pinky all the way over there. He's the slowest moving little guy, and he's nature. He's very slow, and 6 digits over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the other hand, you have that thumb kind of all by itself. That could be fashion and art. It's kind of the fastest moving. And from the right of fashion and art out to commerce on the other thumb, infrastructure, governance, culture, and nature, all the way at the end are the slowest moving orders of civilization. A little bit more to come on this. Let's keep going. So, in a healthy society, each level is allowed to operate on its own pace, safely sustained by the slower levels below, and kept invigorated by the livelier levels above. Every form of civilization is a wise equilibrium between firm substructure and soaring liberty, wrote the historian Eugene Rosenstock Hussey. Each layer must respect, is what I'm trying to say, the different pace of the others. Each layer must respect the different pace of the others. I'm going to break down this next paragraph in my own words because it gets a little bit wordy. But the whole idea here is that, so each layer must respect the different paces of each other. I said that a few times. The idea is that if we don't respect the different layers, then we can potentially have problems. So commerce, for example, which changes, maybe week over week, day over day. Commerce changes very quickly. It's your thumb. It's the thumb on your left hand, right? So if commerce, for example, is allowed by your government and culture to push nature at a commercial pace. So basically saying that if the needs of making money change nature, let's say by deforesting or hurting the fisheries or the water, there's a conflict there. So if governance is changed suddenly, instead of gradually, you get this. Well, that's where revolutions come from. The French and Russian revolutions. So, for example, in the Soviet Union, the government tried to ignore the constraints of culture and nature while forcing their 5-year plan infrastructure pace on commerce and art, thus cutting itself off from both support and innovation. The USSR was doomed. So all of this here is just an example of when these conflict and the revolutions and problems of infrastructure that occur. Hopefully your mind's exploding a little bit. I'm going to keep reading, Mr. Upbrand. We can examine the array layer by layer, working down from fast and attention-getting to slow and powerful. Oh, yeah. Note that as people get older, their interests tend to migrate to the slower parts of the continuum. I can relate to that. Culture is invisible to adolescents, but a matter of great concern to elders. Adolescents are obsessed by fashion. Elders are bored by it. The job of fashion and art is to be froth, quick, irrelevant, engaging, self-preoccupied, and cruel. Try this. No, try this. Culture is cut free to experiment as creatively and irresponsibly as society can bear. From all this variety comes driving energy for commerce. So, for example, the annual change in automobile models or fashion and things like that, and the occasional good idea or practice that sifts down to improve the deeper levels, such as governance becoming responsive to opinion polls, or culture gradually accepting multiculturalism as structure instead of grist for entertainment. If commerce is completely unfettered and unsupported by watchful governance and culture, I'm going to repeat that again because I said it kind of quick. If commerce is completely unfettered and unsupported by watchful governance and culture, it easily becomes crime, as in some nations and republics after the fall of communism. Likewise, commerce may instruct but not control the levels below it, because commerce alone is too short-sighted. As it should be, right? One of the stresses of our time is the way commerce is being accelerated by global markets and the digital network revolutions. The proper role of commerce is to both exploit and absorb these shocks, passing some of the velocity and wealth onto the development of new infrastructure, at the same time respecting the deeper rhythms of governance and culture. Infrastructure, as essential as it is, cannot be justified in strictly commercial terms. Nope. The payback period for such things as transportation and communication systems is too long for standard investment. So, you get government-guaranteed instruments such as bonds or government-guaranteed monopolies. Governance and culture, the slower changing, of course, must be willing to take on the huge cost and prolonged disruptions of constructing sewer systems, roads, and communication systems, all the while bearing in mind the health of the slower natural infrastructures, such as water, climate, and so on. And this is me talking here, this conflict is why it's so hard to get anything done in Congress, why it is so hard to get things passed, because we are voting from two different timescales. We are voting because we want the immediate, the commerce and the infrastructure coming from our government to make new roads, to make new fracking, to make new oil coming to us, all these things which day over day seem to make a lot of sense. But if we think about the scales of time and the longer implications or the responsibility of that governance and the bedrock of which it sits on, which is culture and nature, there's this whole thing which we are disrupting. And in one way that makes a lot of sense, that is of course the argument, but there's something about breaking it into these 6 scales and showing the respect of where governance fits in that to me brings a lot of clarity in my mind about how to approach and argue some of these atrocities that are going on right now, such as, the world's falling apart. Bleak, Chris. Okay, going on. Education is intellectual infrastructure. So is science. Very high yield, but delayed payback. Think about that. Hasty societies that cannot span these delays will lose out over time to societies that can. On the other hand, cultures too hidebound to allow education to advance at the infrastructural pace also lose out. In the realm of governance, the most interesting trend in current times, besides the worldwide proliferation of democracy and the rule of law, is the rise of what is coming to be called the social sector. So the public sector is government, right? And the private sector is business. And so the social sector is non-governmental, non-profit, do-good organizations. They'd be like supported by philanthropy and the toil of volunteers. Volunteers, church charities, land trusts, disease support groups, local players like the International Red Cross, worldwide, the World Wildlife Foundation or Fund, all that kind of stuff. So what such organizations have in common is that they indeed serve the larger, slower good. Okay. I'm going to fast forward a little bit through this page and get down to the long now and where that fits in. So culture. Culture is where the long now operates. Culture's vast, slow motion dance keeps century and millennium time. Slower than political and economic history, culture moves at the pace of language and religion. Culture is the work of whole people. In Asia, whole peoples. In Asia, you surrender to culture when you leave the city and hike back to the mountains, traveling back in time into remote village cultures where change is century-paced. In Europe, you can see it in the terminology, where the names of the months, set up by governance, have varied radically since the 1500s, but the names of the signs of the zodiac, which are part of the culture, remain unchanged for millennia. As for nature, well, it continues to surprise us. Take, for example, the world's first empire, the Akkadian in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. This was around 2300 BCE, and they lasted only 100 years. So that was from 2300 to 2200. Counting down. It was wiped out by a drought that went on for 300 years. So that's nature. Another example is Europe's first empire, the Minoan civilization. They fell to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions in the 15th century BCE. So when we disrupt nature at its own scale and think about us with our extinction engine, what we're currently going through with greenhouse gases in our recent times, well, we risk triggering these apocalyptic forces. Stewart Brand writes, like it or not, we now have to comprehend and engage the still longer now of nature. In closing, the final paragraph here. The division of powers among the layers of civilization allows us to relax about a few of our worries. We should not deplore rapidly changing technology and businesses while government controls, culture moors, and so-called wisdom changes slowly. That's their job. Also, we should not fear destabilizing positive feedback loops, such as the singularity, and we should not fear them crashing the whole system. Such disruptions usually can be isolated and absorbed. Remember, that's how we started this chapter. The total effect of the pace layers is that they provide many-leveled, corrective, stabilizing, negative feedback throughout the system. It is precisely in the apparent contradictions of pace that civilizations find their surest health. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. This chapter here, just a few ways that this hit me. After reading this chapter, it really gave me some hope and patience, some kind of peace of mind of just thinking about how the fast and slow layers of time are moving at the same time right now, right? From fashion and art and commerce moving really quickly to how culture and nature change more gradually over time. This has been a point of frustration for me over the years in various different causes that I've, committed myself to. Being back in college, I remember being really appalled at the sweatshop labor that was going on in the Nike factories back in the 90s. I remember hearing about that, and then I was in college and I was outraged. So I would boycott wearing the swoosh sign. I would boycott Nike. I would talk to my friends about it. I would protest, walk in on protests in Washington, D.C., do like everything that I can do. And I did it in a really compressed, excited, maybe possibly too impassioned split of time and felt burnt out right away. And I wonder if you've felt impassioned. Maybe you've watched a documentary or read a book or outraged by something, in society that you thought that you could change. I'm sure you've had one of those moments. Think of it right now if you can. And I wonder how you stuck with it, because it's not always easy when you get upset, when you get emotional, to carry that. The heart gets affected and in some ways heals, or the mind forgets over time. I mean, I think the hardest work is the consistency of approaching, a belief over time, right? Because I gave up. I mean, I was in college and I was, 20 at the time, and within a year, in some ways, I just wasn't as active in that movement, and I probably went to some other cause that I cared about. But looking back and reflecting on this, I think that there were some inherent. It's hard to really think about, but some inherent changes that took place, like in the chemistry of my body, because although I maybe wasn't going to the meetings anymore or being so actively vocal, those changes in how I approached sweatshop labor and how I approached fair work and fair wage, they did trickle their way more slowly into my buying decisions, into the companies that I support, even to this day. It's just that I'm maybe not, wearing a slavery t-shirt with a swoosh on it, which is something it's probably in my attic somewhere still. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here is it's the prolonged, slower time pace that we try to attack these really emotional problems that that matter, and giving it the space and patience of time, because to change culture takes a lot of time. It's not something that I can expect that's going to happen just in 1 year. And by giving it that time, it gives me a little bit of perspective. One thing that has always struck me as being contrary somewhat to this principle of culture taking time to change is the gluten-free I don't want to say movement in the United States especially, where seemingly overnight menus, even McDonald's have had these like gluten-free options, right? Everybody is all of a sudden aware of it. And when that struck, that gave me a lot of hope and wow. You know what? If people do want to change something, they could change it. They can make it happen, and it's just that we're like a little bit lazy sometimes. And I contrast that to a movement which is, really impactful and powerful to me, which is the plant-based movement of reducing meat consumption. Because with that, I mean, if there's anything that you wanted to do right now to improve climate change, there's no doubt that, going vegetarian or just even eating less meat during the week has the largest impact that you could have on greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, and all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people know that, and it's one thing to know it, and it's another thing to feel it in your heart, and it's another thing to do it day after day, or to talk about it. It's a hard thing to talk about, but I think somewhere between the spheres, just in my own personal life, I'm just kind of putting this out there, between the way I approached the Nike thing about 10 years ago of all my energy in one weekend and getting burnt out and and exacerbated and the approach to little by little, trying to live my life eating less meat when I can. Somewhere between that steady and the sudden, I think you'll see the way that time can shift and that culture can shift, and the gluten-free movement is an exception. And I think we could go as far back to any movement in the past, from civil rights to slavery to everything that I'm sure at the time the generation looking at that problem was like, oh, it's just normal. This is just the way things are. I think there's a lot that can change, and it's just not going to change at the rate of New York Fashion Week twice a year in New York City, where everything, or the rate of music or the rate of art. It's going to take time. And I think that's part of doing the hard work of doing good in the world and leaving the world better than how you found it. And that was one of the big takeaways from this chapter for me. All right. So yeah, I feel that. I encourage you to write me or to share to me some of the causes that you care about. And I would love to hear your stories on what you gave to that cause or what you're still giving to it in any way, some of the struggles. I'd be happy to read those if a few of those come in on a future episode. So please share those. All right. So I'm going to close this episode out. Thanks for listening. All right. Thanks again for listening to On Books. Please subscribe. Do it. Subscribe on iTunes. It's free. Tell a friend or two if you can. It would really help support the show. I've been putting videos on the YouTube where you can get some videos of kind of top 5 from some of the books, as well as some other learnings and ideas. I've been active over there, so you can check that out on my YouTube channel. All of this and book notes from this book are at on-books.com. My email is chris@on-books.com. All right, next week we will dive into the last part of this book, which is the clock itself, the 10,000-year clock that is being constructed in California. This is a clock that will outlast your life by 10 times. How do we construct it? What goes into that thinking? What social norms, what government responsibilities are part of this? These are all of the questions that we'll be looking into, and that will be followed up by an interview with the inventor of the clock, Xander Rose. So I'm looking forward to that. Until then, all right, we're out.